Day by day, little by little, we write the story of our lives. Join author Joe Alch on a walk down memory lane with tenacious humans who didn't let their circumstances dictate their life and what they could become. Welcome to the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast.
Good morning today. We are continuing on writing your story and telling your story. We have an awesome guest today. She was actually instrumental in my book. She is a memoir writing, she is a life coach, memoir writing teacher. I took classes from Alice for about 3 years as I wrote my book. So just a little bio on Alice. It's Alice Parker. She's originally from Chicago. She has degrees in psychology, marketing, and bicultural studies in graduate school. She was a corporate business trainer for many years, then in HR management for many years. She has an awesome memoir. I could not put it down, Choices, Changes, and Friends, and wrote another awesome book, Move Past Your Past. And she has used her life lessons to work with future authors to tell their story and share their story. So welcome, Alice. I'm so excited you're here today. I'm blessed to have you here.
Thank you so much, Joe. And as I've said several times, I'm so proud of you in getting your memoir published.
Thank you. And like I say, you were 9/10 of the battle, and I'm forever grateful. And let's talk about what you do. Let's talk about just getting that story on paper. There are a lot of online classes. I did try that. I did a class in New York City. It was my first attempt. And it was an online class with about 10 people. And after the third week, I couldn't do it. It just wasn't for me. I just felt disconnected. My sister ran into you at a meeting and met you, and she called me right after the meeting and said, Joe, you have got to meet Alice Parker. She's got this class. You want to write your book. You want to write your story. I think you two need to connect. So let's start from there. So tell me about your story and how you got into memoir writing classes.
Well, my book, Choices, Changes, and Friends, 1970s after divorce, 4 of us, suburbanite housewives in Chicago, kind of a Sex and the City of suburbanite housewives. We got our divorces together in the early 70s. And while we didn't consider ourselves to be special, we realized right away with all of the challenges we were facing, and we wouldn't have called ourselves pioneers, but we were, as far as what we were doing. So I had been the chronicler as well as the poet of the group and the writer and everything. And as we started to keep track of it all and working with them, so jump forward quite a few years, and one of the members of the 4, she had asked me not to publish it at a particular time, about 20 years later, because she had had this trauma, big trauma in her life, and she had moved and she was trying to start a new life, and she didn't want anybody to know about how wild and crazy it had been, and so on and so forth and everything, and I honored that. And I think particularly when it is somebody who is very much involved in the lives, then you want to do that. She passed in 2015, October 10th, and one of the last things she said to me, because I spent 3 days with her before she passed, and she said, I want you to get that book out there because I think it can change lives. And to me, that is the key thing. So many of us don't realize or can't imagine that our story can actually change the lives of other people and encourage them to go ahead and tell their story. So that was one of the key things with it. Now, earlier in 2005, when I was living in San Francisco, and a friend of mine who knew about my memoir told me about a class that San Francisco State University was doing on memoirs to kind of familiarize people. And it was a continuing ed class in the evening, so I was able to go to it and everything. And I wanted to make sure I was kind of getting it all together, even though I had been writing for 20, 30 years myself and everything. It was to get clarity. You do not have to be a movie star or a famous person or whomever to do your memoir. Even if you self-publish and you're only sharing it with friends and so forth, it still can change lives, besides the most important one, your own. My disappointment in that class was similar to like what you're saying. It was a very large class, and I could understand. There was 20, 25 people. It was only 90 minutes, and it was for 4 weeks, but it was mainly introducing people, but they really didn't go into a lot of details. And because of the short period of time, there would sometimes be only 4 or 5 people who got to read what they brought in. And I felt, from my years as being a corporate trainer in Japan, interacting to me was always key, especially for my Japanese managers who were being sent overseas. If they didn't get real interaction with other native English speakers, they weren't going to understand. And I saw this also, the frustration among the other people in the class. I mean, out of the first 4 weeks, I got to read one time, and we were limited to 5 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, which was considerably less than what I had for my students. Anyway, I went ahead and I took the class again because they kept repeating it and everything. It was generally for seniors, but anyone. And after that second class, I did talk to one of the teachers, gave her my background and all of my writing and so on and so forth, as well as my training, teaching experience. And at that time, she said, well, maybe you'd like to help out with us. And I said, is there any chance you could do smaller classes so more people could read and interact? And she was like, oh, no, we can't do that. Well, anyway, I went ahead and I did help them for 2 more classes, 2 more sections of classes and so forth. So I was very comfortable with the whole idea. And more than anything, that whole realization, everybody, absolutely everybody has a story. And some people are in total denial of that story, as far as like, oh, who am I? I never did anything. Then the other thing that I ran into once I started doing classes, excuse me, was making a rule. And my first rule was, no one edits you. In other words, I don't want your spouse, I don't want your siblings, I don't want your parents, I don't want your best friends. Nobody, I don't care if you have a twin, nobody lived your life. And the more that I worked with it, and especially being a life coach during that time too, and I was doing a lot of classes, and that was using my other book that I had written from a blog, Move Past Your Past, a process for changing your life. That was the key thing that I used in so many of my presentations and classes. And that was the whole realization of when you can talk, or more particularly write about different things in your life, you can really have that realization of letting it go. Just and you know, you heard me say how many times, every time we would start a new class and have newbies come in, I would say you're going to be hitting that wall as you start to build up with that you've pushed down so deep into you, and you keep hitting it, and once you get that comfortableness of sharing with the other people, and I would only let people do positive feedback. In other words, they could do questions or suggestions, but no one was a critic, not even me. I tried to keep everything very, very positive.
Well, and that's what I admired so much, because everyone in the class is novice. We're a newbie, and you have this way of, instead of saying that is really crappy, start over, you'd say, okay, I am missing something here.
Exactly.
I am not understanding. You're describing this, but tell me more about this. And and an answer would be, well, I didn't think that was important.
Exactly.
And your response would be, write it down.
Yeah.
Write it down. And just so the audience will know, every week we'd meet. It was 6-week courses.
Yes. 2 hours.
And 2 hours. There were, how many would you say in our class?
I did not want to have more than 8 people in the class, so everyone got at least 20 minutes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay. So we all wrote 1,500 words.
Yes.
It didn't have to be chronological.
No.
It could be just what we were thinking about, because a book, writing your story is a huge undertaking. It took me 4 years. And I would get, some parts to my book were so difficult for me.
Yes.
I'd have to write, put it down, take a break. I think once in those 3 years, once or twice, I took breaks from the class. It was hard. It was very hard to share and open up and accept what was fact, you know. Sometimes I would read, and every eye in the room would be like saucers, like, okay, Joe, did that really happen? Yeah, kind of did. But anyway, you had this way. So just making the class come alive.
Yes.
And I think with your psych background,
Yes.
And drawing people together, and not everybody can do that. And
No.
you had such a way of getting us to write. So let's just talk about, you get a group together.
Yes.
Say someone, let's just say at a library, calls Alice and says, Alice, you know what? I want to do a group here, a memoir writing group. I've had requests. So you've got 10 people sign up. Mm-hmm. So the first class, what do you tell them as you introduce yourself, and just kind of walk the audience through how that starts?
Well, I try to get their email right away so I can send them some basic information. I added a second rule, and that second rule, so not only are you not being edited, second rule is, if you don't write, don't come to class.
And that's a great...
I think it's very important, because while everyone had to agree, nothing in that room left the room. Mm-hmm. Okay? And this is a very important thing, because as people are sharing, they're sharing really, as I said, those things that they've pushed out. Now, they may not do that the first week. I've never had anyone do that the first week. They want to get comfortable with the other people and have that feedback, not just from me, but from others. And I always said, getting those other 8 opinions, really, you will see, oh my God, that happened to me too. Oh, wow, that makes me remember something. And that's one of the powers of a group, is especially when you get people who are similar age, I would say 10, 20 years within each other, they're going to have similar things happening. I mean, if you take, like for us, one of the most iconic, and you had it in your book, was of course JFK being assassinated, all right? And the different stories that would come out with something like that. But you have that relationship. I'm relatable to you. You understand. You were through a simpler thing than I was. But the idea that I try to clarify, there will be tears. They can be tears of joy. It was the most amazing experience I ever had in my life. And, of course, the tears of release and sadness. I made it through that. And just that alone, that whole thing of overcoming challenges, I mean, that was the key thing in our book. That's how we became independent women, was overcoming that whole denial of divorced women in the 70s. And this is where it hasn't changed that much, not just because we're women, because I would usually have 40% men, 40% men, but a lot of men aren't that comfortable in the sharing, like a lot of women are. But anyway, so that was the main thing. But as I was saying before, I would try to let them know as they're getting more and more comfortable with the group and the sharing, that they will finally do a breakthrough of that wall. And this is, and I would tell everybody, this is like you're going whoosh, throwing that wet blanket off your shoulders, and oh my God, I feel so free. And they'd all kind of go, until it happened to them. And you saw this. And this was one of those things, I probably had at least one, sometimes two breakthroughs in each 6-week period. And again, some of them, it might have been their second or third or fourth 6 weeks that they were with me.
Well, I have to share, a part in my book is I had this cat. I had, of course, very dysfunctional childhood, and I had this cat, and he was my best friend. He was my confidant. We were together. When I was at home, I was always with my cat, and he just vanished one day, and had the cat for about 2 years. And when I was reading that, I could not stop crying. I was uncontrollably sobbing. And one thing you said, Joe, it is nothing about the cat. And that was such a breakthrough for me. It was really what I was going through. It was my really understanding the depth of the grief and just the grief as a child, what I was going through. And you helped me so much understand that. One other thing I love that you do is we would have like show and tell every week. And what memoir teachers do that, but this was what made it so special, because we would bring something that we might be writing about, and our fellow writers, just an example, one of the women in our class was writing about her grandfather that was in war, and she brought his actual helmet to class, and you could see the inside of the helmet. His head was in that helmet. And how incredible to step into the past by looking at these special things, or newspaper clippings, or just a doll, or and that really helped us all step into each other's lives. You know, that was wonderful. How you did that. Yeah.
It wasn't a requirement, but as other people saw them bringing show and tell, they would think about something too. And I also, as you remember, very, very open. If somebody wanted to bring in some poems that they wrote, or other kind of things that was related to, as long as it was related to their whole story of their life, anything that would add to that. And it's kind of, there is nothing like a visual aid. We all know that, and especially when you have people who are more kinetic, as far as they have to have that touch or have that realization. I mean, I remember when one of the students, and I don't know if you were in the class, brought in a sprig of cotton with actually the cotton balls on it and everything, because talking about that was part of their childhood type of a thing. And how many adults in suburbia or a city has ever really seen cotton balls? I mean, a real sprig of from a cotton plant. So these kind of things, I always felt you do whatever you need to do. And of course we had photos, frequently photos, and those were always so powerful and really made a difference. But again, the feedback that you would get from each other, and that kind of encouraging and spurring them on. And particularly, I had some students who, in the off times, because I would do the 6-week classes 3 or 4 times a year, and in the off times, they wanted to have some private sessions, as you did. And in that, when we would be working one-on-one, and more than once, as you remember, you and I sitting at your desk and both of us sobbing. And I did that with other students too, because this is the most pure release that you could get. And that was something that I always encouraged them to do. And do research. Because I would say, let's paint a picture in the background. What was going on in the world during that time? And that whole realization of, well, there was this going on or that going, oh, yeah, I was involved in that. Or, oh, my parents, or we were taken to that. So those kind of things that you may not remember specifically, we're jogging the brain, or as I said, pushing it forward, because it's all in there.
Yeah. And, I think about, we took a trip together to New Orleans.
We did. Yes.
And this was really great. You had me ride on a streetcar and really think about the smells and the sounds and the
Get all
whistles.
those senses in there. Yes.
And I sat there and I just felt like I was a little girl again.
Yes.
And I couldn't even talk. I had to kind of take it all in and remember things. But that was so great. I also, when I was writing, I would go to estate sales. I would go to antique fairs and seeing things from the 60s and 70s that I would remember as a child and teenager really did help me. Listening to music at that time, from that time, it made me think back. I remember I graduated from high school in 79, and that song, We Are Family, and my brother and I are driving and like singing to the top of our lungs, that song I'll never forget. But those, just things like that jaunt those memories, pictures and special little things, like you say, poems or sheet music or whatever it can be. So let's talk about the cons of the class. And I loved how you handled the cons. We had a particular, I remember in class, I think it was so emotional for some of the, one of the students just started screaming. Do you remember that? And walked out of the class. I won't go into the specifics. But it is emotional. It's tough. And it's tough to share your soul. And you're thinking, okay, I'm sharing to this group of 10 people, but what about the whole world? What are they going to say? Alice, you handled that so graciously. And you stayed calm. I think that's the psych background. And she excused herself. We okay, let's all take a moment and let's get back to what we're doing again. So, it's hard. And that's what I'm going to say. It's hard. So to share these things. So just some other cons. What, let's say somebody wants to talk about something that's uncomfortable for another student in the class.
Right.
So how do you handle that?
Well, first of all, let me say I had people who had different kinds of brain difficulties. PTSD, they'd had traumatic, TBI, traumatic brain injury. I had people who had had brain strokes and bipolar. Several people had been referred to me by their therapist and everything. And it was that kind of a realization that sometimes there's going to be their eruptions, or they may take what you say or what somebody else says, turn it around and kind of take that personal or something. And this is where I would try to immediately jump on that and try to let them know this is all about your life. They're not talking about your life. They're talking about their life, not talking about your life. And this kind of a situation, sometimes I would have to get to the point that if you're not comfortable with how I'm handling this, I'm sorry. And you're welcome to leave. Now, I had a couple of people who could not handle getting to that deep, dark place. And some people barely got through the first class. Other people, they might have made it to the third one, and they knew it was kind of edging up, that it was time for them to sort of, and not that I ever told them, you have to do this. I always let everybody go on their own. But if they're going to take something personal, which is being discussed, they're going to have to realize this was happening to the person who is reading it or talking about it. And for that, they need to bring this out. Now, we did have a situation, which unfortunately did involve you, where a prior student,
I remember that.
he was a TBI as well as PTSD and everything from an auto accident. And up until the time that you came in, and I had to constantly kind of rein him in, because that 2-hour class was like, oh, it's all about me, it's all about me, you know. And which wasn't, of course, how he started out. I mean, he started out just kind of really, but unfortunately, come on, you can do this, until the point where by the time Joe joined, I think he was going into his second or third year, and he was really, I mean, his therapist was so thrilled how well he was doing. Unfortunately, his prior career, he was a doctor. He was a God Junior. And he started feeling, and I could see that ego start coming back, you know, kind of a thing. And then you came in the class, and here you were, the only person who could ever really kind of challenge him in the medical field, okay? And he was not happy with that at all. He was no longer the star. He no longer had the really traumatic story, because we moved past that. He was actually getting down to closer modern times, I guess I should say, up to date stuff, where he wasn't ready to let go of his whole trauma, or I was the victim here, you know, kind of a thing. And he began trying to poke holes into whatever you would say. And I was like, wait a minute.
I know, and you did.
You're not going to go there. You're not going to go there. You're having an ego problem. And sometimes I would just nail him right there, and he would get sort of pissed off, or, you know, kind of a thing, and go to, you know. And I said, now, if you cannot, the old rule, say something nice or helpful, don't say anything at all. I want you to take a pass. And if you're not happy with that, you're welcome to go take a break. Yeah. And I think this is the importance of understanding. I wanted everyone to feel that they could say whatever they needed to say, but I wasn't going to put up with them picking on, you know, is that all you got, or something like that kind of a thing. And if anyone slipped into that, or we had one female student who sometimes would start literally nitpicking, you know, and I'd go, I don't think you should concern yourself about that, okay? And I think some of them, they would also do kind of a sidetrack sometimes. And while, yes, you do bring in your parents or your siblings or your spouse or others like pets and so forth, if it is directly relatable to your story, or kind of gives us a wider view of how your parents really were, you know. And I have to tell you, my 10 years of teaching memoir writing, I've heard about a lot of parents where you just want to go, oh my God, that goes way beyond a piece of work. I mean, you know, they're certifiable. But it was kind of that whole idea that I always tried to encourage. You can rise above this. You can rise above this, because there are so many people who hang on to that bad childhood, and they hang on to the victim, or they go into the whole self-sabotage, which was one of the big things I would talk about so much in classes, my private classes. And this is where, to me, memoir writing can bring you out of that. that whole throw that wet blanket off. You can be the genie in your bottle.
Well, and it's so true, because I've had people say, Joe, do you mind having everybody know your business? And I don't. It's so freeing. I was nervous at first, like, what if I get bad reviews? What if it's horrible? And I did get my first really bad review, which hurt my feelings. I was a little down for a couple of hours, and then I thought, you know what? Who cares?
They don't know.
No, and I've got some of the sweetest
Did they write a memoir?
emails. No, but I've gotten some of the sweetest emails, and I had somebody that read my book and sent me an email and said, I feel like I've lost a best friend. I feel like our lives were so parallel, and you don't know how much you helped me forgive.
Yeah.
And if I allowed one person, if my
Yes.
book made a difference, and that was my goal, if I made
It's
a
always
difference
that.
in one person's
One
life,
person's life.
it's all worth it.
It's worth it. Yes. And let's face it, you did have problems with your older sister who had recommended me to you, but I don't think she expected that you were really going to go,
I know.
you know, and it was all my fault, and your younger brother wasn't thrilled either. But write your own
It's
book.
growing on them. I know.
Yeah,
I know.
write your own book. But that was what I always said, was the importance of how you can change other people's lives. I remember it was only maybe 3 or 4 months after my book came out, and a friend had given a copy to a friend of hers who had been divorced 29 years.
Wow.
And anybody at all who brought up the topic divorce, she would just go boom, you know, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, obviously, a little anger is still there. She read my book, and she emailed me, and she said, I can't believe it. I do understand forgiveness now. And she said, I can't believe I've let it go. And I mean, I got lots of really, really good messages from women and men, you know, on how it helped change their lives. But I've never forgotten that one. And it's because it's exactly like what you said. People do not understand the power of forgiveness. It's you first. You have to forgive you. Because so many people truly think they're to blame, or somehow they contributed to this real crappy childhood. And you heard me say it more than once. Nobody was raised in Disneyland. And this ain't Disney World.
Well, and you know, I worked in psych. You know, I'm a nurse. You know, I learned something just working in this psych hospital. We had we called frequent flyers, and people would come in and they'd be there for a couple weeks. They'd go home, come back a month later, but there you have a choice.
Yes.
You can either stay in that pain, and I know it's tough pain. You have a choice.
Yes.
And when I was writing this book, I would have these dreams that I was inside a mason jar, and the lid was off, but I couldn't get out. I knew that the lid was off, but I looked up and I felt trapped. And you said to me, Joe, what's holding you back from getting out of that jar? And I was like, you're right. It's me. I'm holding myself back.
Yeah.
And I can't control my circumstances. You can't control your past.
Can't change it.
You can't change it. So this has been so awesome. We're going to have you again. But this is something I was just doing a little research on memoir classes. And something I read is, what is my truth? And what will happen if I tell? For me, what has happened? Nothing. It's all been good. It's been great. I haven't...
Freedom.
It's freedom.
Yeah.
And what will happen if it's a flop? Well, so what is if it's a flop, you know? And I looked up successful books that were rejected, and this is so interesting.
Yes.
Gone with the Wind was rejected. The Help, rejected by 57 publishers. The Giving Tree, which is my favorite book, that was rejected. The Life of Pi. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. That story was rejected. Twilight was rejected. And of course, we've all heard the Harry Potter books.
240
Those
times
were
or something.
rejected too. So
Yeah.
successful books, if you have a story, you never know. And
You just have to find the right person that has that realization. Because I know, like you said, a couple of reviews I had like almost instantly on Amazon, and the book is 555 pages. Nobody reads it instantly. And I could tell right away they were probably in their mid-20s and they were male, and they said, who wants to read about a bunch of old ladies having sex? And I'm like, 90% of the book takes place when we're under 30.
I know.
Hello. So it's kind of, you're not really doing it for who's out there. There will be those people. It changes their lives, or it at least makes them think. But you're doing it for you. And that's what it's all about. And that's why I helped so many of my students get published.
And there's so many genres too. There's
yeah.
fiction, there's sci-fi, there's romance novels, and memoirs. There is a certain reader that loves memoirs. So, for me, I love memoirs. I have 2 or 3 waiting in the wings. I loved your book. And it is a longer book. It did take me a few days to read, but it was captivating. And
Thank you.
got through the whole thing. There were so many sad parts. There were funny parts.
Yes.
And just that friendship,
Right.
and just being there for each other.
Yeah, we weren't perfect, obviously. And as we grew, we actually grew more and more independent away from who we had been, some of us more than others. And it's one reason why I'm working for that connection to get it made into a streaming TV series, because I do feel it will help change people's lives as well as entertain. It is very funny. I mean, we were so naive and we made so many mistakes, but we learned from them. And I think that is a realization in writing your memoir too. Look what I overcame. Look what I've really risen above and everything. And sustained positive is the most important thing.
It is. So if you want to be in a memoir writing class, you can go through a university. Our class was continuing ed, which was wonderful. You can go to your rec center. There are writing clubs, and of course, going online writing workshops. And if you want to reach Alice about starting a group in the DFW area,
or I do take private students, because even long distance, we deal with email, and we talk on the phone.
Yeah, and there's Skype too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
how can we reach you, Alice?
My email is A as in Alice, P as in Parker, I like ice, N Nancy, S Sam, F Frank. It stands for Alice Parker in San Francisco. That's how old that email is, at gmail.com, APINSF. Or you can go to my website, www.a-wonderland.com. Always called myself Alice in Wonderland. I have my books listed in there, and I actually sell them through PayPal, which I'm happy to autograph them for you and mail them back to you, all for $25. So
That's awesome. That's
do
awesome.
that. But I have 3 private students now I'm working with, and one of them is one of our former students, and I have shared, of course, your book, and you did, as I told you. 2 of the ladies, they read your book, and it made a difference for them, because one also went through molestation. So, and the other one, it was simply encouraging her to get over that whole other people telling her, oh, you can't do that.
I know.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Kind of a thing. Just suck it up, kid. No. Write about it.
It's the best therapy. Well, thank you so much,
Of
Alice.
course.
I know it's going to be a wonderful year for you in 2020. Get her book. It's fantastic. Both books. Move Past Your Past is more of a self-help.
Yes.
Choices, Changes, and Friends is just about her adventures after divorce. And thank you so much. Thank you, listening audience. And we have a great guest next week, so we're looking forward to seeing you guys again, and have a great, blessed day. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Lemon Tree Memoirs of Courage podcast, hosted by author Joe Alch. You can find more information on Joe's beginnings and the Lemon Tree at thelemontreebook.com.